Go.
Hey, where are you?
To emerge from this COVID 1984 pandemic with the tools to create a new world. The New Athens, the blockchain think tank, brings you those tools to understand the chaos swirling around us and the forum to debate how a new generation will take control from the GoVidiots currently mismanaging our nation and our world with a breakaway civilization leaving us behind. Watch our Friday Night Lights live stream from the bunker on the New Athens YouTube channel for the best that is thought and said on the issues of the day. Ask not what the New Athens can do for you. Ask what you can do for the New Athens. If you like it, leave a like. If you like the content, please subscribe and share. I'm Lorenzo Mefsud, founder of the New Athens. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Hello and welcome to the New Athens. Happy New Year. Is it a bumper crop? Will it be another fallow year? The Shepherd's Almanac, the new almanac, will tell us what to farm, what to harvest, and what to sow and reap. We're here tonight with Lembit Opik, broadcaster, filmmaker, chairman of the Parliament of the Whole of Space.
That's right, Ascardia.
Ascardia. Where will the new year take us? We're in a crisis of freedom, a crisis of action, a crisis of willpower, a crisis of anybody's ability to look at or think about or discuss in public forums what is going on. I've got a couple of stories to look at tonight, but firstly, I wanted to ask Lembit. We've had 2 years now of globalist takeover of the West, lockdown, the destruction of enterprise, of innovation, of any kind of autonomy, sovereignty of people. Where is that heading for the West, do you think? Well, where are we going?
This isn't new, and as we stand on the eve of another year, I would predict there'll be an effort to try to accelerate this, not to decelerate it. Why? Because all the signs are there. Not every politician, but many politicians find it easier to control rather than to liberate. They don't say that. They don't claim that they're trying to limit our liberties. But when they do, they always claim it's for our benefit. Now, that is the age-old adage. You have to have this new rule because it's for your own good. Oh, of course, we trust you, Lorenzo, but these other people might not be so trustworthy. And that's why we have the most insane attitude towards drugs laws in this country. That's, for many people, what's been going on with COVID, where actually they've been guessing a lot of the time what to do. And I would suggest it's also the environmental debate. The environmental debate is a prima facie example of using a perceived crisis to control our very destiny. So I'm not optimistic about it in terms of what people will try to do to us. But I do think if you push people in a free-ish environment too far, they just react. They will revolt. They'll simply say, I'm not doing this anymore. And you can see that happening to an extent because of the hypocrisy of the government when it comes to rules about COVID, where they manifestly broke them themselves. Now, I think people are making a fairly common sense decision about what they believe, what they don't, what they will do, what they won't do, being pretty sure that they're not going to be prosecuted because the one person you can subpoena as evidence in defense of the perceived law breaking is the Prime Minister. If he doesn't get done, then nobody else will. So I agree with your prognosis that we are losing our liberty. I just think that very soon people will say enough.
The common law. I think perhaps what we've seen in the past 2 years is an attempt by those on the Brendan O'Neill podcast the other day, David Starkey appeared, and he said, very interestingly, I thought, that the lockdowns are the revenge of the professionals. Now, I was really intrigued by this. So, you've been inside Parliament, Westminster, and the elites of the establishment of this country. You know, I'm sure, as you say, that these people don't think of themselves as public servants. They think of themselves as those who tell the public what must be done.
Yeah.
And so what I thought was particularly interesting about what Starkey had to say was he said, look, the salesman is an honest profession. All they're doing is they have a thing and they want to convince you that that thing is what you want. Whereas the professional is an impersonal relationship. It's not a relationship of a contract. It's a relationship actually of a power dynamic. And the professional, in David Starkey's sense, says, I don't want to give you what you want. I want to give you what you ought to have, what's best for you, in my opinion, my professional opinion. So he related that to the EU and the Brexit debate. His notion was, after the collapse of the Remain campaign, the Revanche campaign of cancelling and overturning Brexit, actually that Remainer rump, that long parliament, found another orthogonal means to gain control over society, not through Brussels, but through the entry of government into every aspect of our lives. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I agree up to a point. Just to get the bit of disagreement out of the way, because it's actually a moot issue. There is a danger of sounding like a conspiracy theorist when we talk like this. But what if there is a conspiracy? That's the thing. And
well, as Yossarian said, I'm not paranoid. They are allowed to get me.
As in Catch-22, one of the all-time great books, of course, by Joseph Heller, who I could have met actually in the 1980s, but I forgot. I'd been invited to meet him. There's an unexpected confession for the evening. But returning to the point you're making, I have seen this authoritarian march writ large in the environmental debate. There are a lot of people who deny climate change. The environmental fanatics seem to act like climate hasn't changed before. Climate has always changed. And the ultimate irony of the situation is that those climate change deniers accuse people like me, who are doubtful about the impact of human beings on the climate, as being the deniers. That doublethink is exactly the sort of Orwellian concern that George Orwell wrote about in 1984. I would say that the biggest single threat to our freedom is actually the argument that we have to get to something called net zero to stop producing carbon dioxide, even though there really isn't a scientific correlation. Or if there is, the scientific correlation seems to indicate that CO2 follows climate temperature change. Certainly, if you look at ice ages and so forth, there doesn't seem to be that strong scientific ground. But it doesn't matter, because we are being told we have to do this. We can't buy petrol-powered cars from 2030, petrol-powered motorbikes from 2035. So that, to me, is the biggest single example of what you said. Secondly, the Remain campaign had some legitimacy. I actually voted Remain, but wouldn't now because of the antics of the European Union to punish us since then. But it does seem to be the same people who preached to us about the European Union and our need to stay in, and implying there'd be World War III if we left. Those same people have now jumped onto the environmental bandwagon and the COVID bandwagon. Now, I had COVID. It was a really difficult disease. I nearly died from it. I've had 2 vaccinations and I had a booster, and that went badly.
Vaccine injuries?
I would say I suffered a vaccine injury. I was totally off color. I hallucinated and so forth. But I did my duty, as the government told me to do. I did my duty. And now I'm told I have to have one again every 3 or 6 months. How much junk do I have to put into my body before I'm given the right to look after my body again and make these choices? So all of this big picture is we're being told what to do by a group which is either motivated by self-interest, by a professional concern, as you said, or by a cynicism which is about control. And we've seen all of these in various forms across the last century.
I pose a financial model for this. So if you look at the credit crisis in 2008, the Western system of finance had weaned itself onto mortgage payments, onto loan obligations as a means of tranching up assets and turning them into income streams, which could then be parceled up and sold off on a market of derivatives, creating more financialized products, which inflated the amount of money in existence in trade, but not producing any real value for humans. An economy of worthless paper, not even paper. That came to a head with the financial crisis in 2008, out of which Bitcoin arose as a rebellion on the internet, saying we can do a central bank with computer nerds better than any of the central bankers have ever done. And we've seen that over the past 10 years with the value of Bitcoin and how it preserves people's value outside of these hyperinflating currencies like we're seeing in Turkey today. But more specifically, everything is a CLO. Everything is a collateralized loan obligation. You buy a phone on hire purchase. You buy a dress for a party if you're going to a wedding on hire purchase. Everything is turned now after the collapse of the mortgage default swap crisis. The finance guys, they were so keen on CLOs, on that waterfall of the tranches of collateralized obligations, income every month reliably from this source that you can then parcel up and sell out, that they said, okay, it's failed with mortgage, we've got to have a reconsider. What's the ultimate form? Not phones, not clothes, not cars. What's the ultimate form of renewable monthly income stream? Look, diabetics, very sad, have to inject themselves a lot of the time to keep their homeostatic system available to have a normal life. Now, what we've seen in the past 2 years is, as you say, an increasing propaganda mechanism across these professional classes that people with normal health, with normal health and with a workable immune system to exist in public, they're now sick. And so they're now in deficit, and they have to bring themselves back up to the mean. And what is that? What is that? That's a shot. And even if it's free at the point of use, Pfizer is getting paid directly from the Treasury for that shot. And then if you parcel that up, you've got to buy 100 million. As Sajid Javid said the other day, we bought 100 million more shots for the next 5 rounds of the treatment of healthy people. Everyone in the inside of the honeycomb, which I'm sure knows where to put their money. It's in stock of Pfizer and Moderna, because they know there's a government contract sitting there for those shots to be provided.
Yeah, it seems to me you're right about this. Somehow, across the last 3,500 million years, life has struggled on. We've got by. Spanish flu, big problem just less than a century ago. People literally dropping dead in the streets. We got through it.
Caught the young.
Spanish
flu affected the young, the ones that survived the First World War.
Spanish flu is a horrendous disease, and in my judgment, worse than what we've got now. Maybe it's because we've got better treatment systems, but there's no doubt that the human race has been through this cycle before. That's how it works. We are derived from viruses. A bit of an oversimplification, but essentially we are. They've got a huge head start on us. They've got a back door into our bodies. When are we going to start accepting this? My concern about where we're heading now is this coercive, forced medication. I don't use aspirin when I've got a headache. I very rarely take any drugs. I'll do it if I have to. Like if I've had an operation, I'll take the antibiotics that I'm prescribed, because I don't play jokes with people who know better than me. But now I'm not so comfortable with this anymore. I had the disease. I had 2 jabs. I've had the booster. And I think my body reacted to the booster because it said enough. How much more muck are you going to put into this body? And turning to what you said and looking at 2022, my big concern is that finger pointing at you and saying it's all for your good, or do you want Granny to die because you haven't done your duty? is something that works well because most people are decent and tend to trust authority. Professionals, politicians less so. But when somebody like Whitty, who does come across as very plausible, says stuff, people will go along with it. And the danger comes not in Whitty's case. I think he's a straight player, but when there's a massive vested interest in getting us to do all this, even though it seems to me Omicron might be close to bad flu now, it's actually doing what diseases do. They modify, they moderate, and then they become endemic. But back to this point about the environment, this, to me, the biggest single threat is actually the environmental one. And in 2022, we're going to see more scare stories about how we're wrecking the planet. But notice always with that one, it's in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 15 years' time, it's going to be runaway greenhouse suffering. And we get to this ridiculous situation where global warming's creating blizzards because apparently
we had global warming, then we had now the Guardian and is pushing global heating, and then you've actually got the non-falsifiable notion of climate change, where up or down, I'm still right. And I saw so that's anti-science, because it's saying actually I'm not going to make a prediction and stand on whether I'm right or wrong. If anything moves, I'm right, or if nothing changes, I'm probably right because it's going to change later. You know, this kind of thinking is the trust the science thinking that we've seen with the lockdowns of people who have no idea about the scientific method, but are wearing lab coats or called officers of medicine or officers of science in a militarized state, which is, you know, a militarized lockdown. And the officer of medicine is telling you what you must do with your body. We're seeing a medical takeover of the bodies of individuals, as you found at the blunt end. I heard a beautiful but deeply tragic story the other day, which was that in the aftermath of the Fukushima nuclear leak, the social structure of Japanese society was strong enough that it was the old that were volunteering to go into the reactor and clean it out so that the young wouldn't have to die. Now that it's dark, but it's kind of beautiful. That's the opposite of what we're seeing now. We're seeing a reaping of the young for this notion of, well, we're parking the sick in care homes, so we're actually doing the Liverpool care pathway. Hancock was asked, do you have enough syringe drivers and enough morphine to give them all a good death in the care homes at a select committee? And he said yes. This was in the first month of the lockdown. You know, this is a weird kind of, we're in a zombie state in this country and in the West. China's not in a zombie state. They know what they're doing. One thing I wanted to talk about, I mentioned to you about climate change, I saw that I'm sure you saw too, was with the Kyoto Protocol. America under Bush didn't sign up. They said, drill, baby, drill. China signed up, but they didn't do it. On the Silk Road, they were building coal-fired cities, making cushions and Huawei and so on. Massive industrialization, massive increase in carbon emissions and pollution. Now, the geopolitics has changed. Now with the COP26, what do we see? China's gained in puissance. China now doesn't have to sign up. They said before they realized it was strategic to sign, but do what they were going to do anyway, because nobody would be watching, because they'd be too busy looking at Bush versus Gore with the documentary
An Inconvenient Truth.
And that was a massive brouhaha in the West. Now what we see is China says we're going to industrialize. We don't need to kowtow to your pieces of paper anymore. And what's the Western response? A man crying, a grown man weeping. Like, are we in a zombie state right now?
Yeah.
I mean, we're entering a new year. Last week, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted. Epstein's guards, who supposedly who supposedly were looking at expensive furniture and motorcycles and having a nap while he was hanging himself with toilet paper in his cell. They were exonerated of all charges, and the Epstein files have been closed, with only a woman being the fall gal for this whole scenario. Things are being buried right now in a zombie week. Are we living a zombie life? Has anyone got any ideas about what to do with 2022?
Yeah, many of us do. This is why we're sitting here doing this, because although it's hard to find an avenue to voice dissent, they haven't been shut down completely. There are some interesting developments. GB News, I'm on that quite often. I find them to actually be genuinely trying to open things up. They're still developing their narrative, but you can go on there and they don't cancel you. You can look in the camera and say there is no climate emergency, and they don't just go to adverts. They let you have arguments, and their presenters are actually allowed to have, to some extent, the opportunity to push on you as well when you're there. That's refreshing. But what worries me is much of the rest of the mainstream media is stuck. Sky News, what is it doing with its climate emergency program every day or week? I'm not sure how often it is. I watch it occasionally, but it's all about nudging, political nudging. And we actually know that there's a department.
Steve Hilton and David Cameron had this, again, a professionalized notion of what's good for you is subliminal. We're not even going to tell you this is what we want. We're going to give you subliminal messaging where you don't even get to decide for yourself.
What I think that will happen, the general public, in whom I have a lot of faith, will eventually notice what's going on. Say, wait a minute, you're saying I cannot buy a petrol replacement for my Ford Mondeo after 2030. Take a hike. Then Labour, which couldn't be doing much worse as an opposition at the moment.
More lockdown. The opposition is more lockdown.
A party, exactly, a party which could have said, we will not support more legislation because the people who are asking us to vote for it couldn't follow it themselves.
There's been no COVID election.
They can't. Well,
they said there was no Brexit election, and then we had many. Constantly over several years, the plebiscite came back in different forms, whether it's direct in the referendum and so on. Now there was a whole load of democracy deficit problems going on there and arguments about that. And there's been no COVID election anywhere in the world. And yet every nation is in lockstep.
Keir Starmer, in terms of the UK, looking at 2022, Keir Starmer's horrendous error is not leading. If Tony Blair was in charge of the Labour Party now, he would be running rings around the Conservatives, whether you like what Tony Blair did or not. He was a good operator. Keir Starmer slavishly supports the very government who he could have hold below the waterline by simply saying, enough of this regulation. We trust the public. And since you in Downing Street were having your parties or in Conservative Party headquarters, let's not pretend that you're anything other than hypocrites. So Keir Starmer, we the Labour Party, appeal to the public to work with us, but we're not going to prosecute you if you don't, because it's a ridiculous notion. So we haven't got a party like that. And Keir Starmer, I believe, won't be able to find that leadership. They're saddled with him till the next election, which I predict will be in May 2023. They can't get rid of him before then. So essentially, Boris's biggest asset is such a weak leadership in Labour. What does this look like in 2022? Probably more stumbling guesswork about COVID restrictions, but they know in England that people don't take Boris and his colleagues too seriously because of the level of contradiction and what they tell us to do and what they do themselves. By the way, I like Boris as a person. It's not personal, but from a political point of view, it's quite ridiculous what they've done because it's so inconsistent. So I think we'll have more stumbling efforts to try to sort of lock us down in January. I don't think they'll actually legislate for it because, as I said before, it's not plausible. You can't prosecute anyone unless you prosecute the Prime Minister.
It didn't work with Marie Dinu. You came across those cases. We've explained them on the show before. I just wanted to mention, you were in Parliament, were you, when Blair pushed the Afghan and Iraq wars through with Tory votes?
Yeah.
Now we're seeing Johnson pushed through lockdown measures with Labour votes. So we see this run for the establishment, where, but also the Brexit Tories who now become the anti-lockdown. There's a certain element of maybe in the English character of the valiant but ultimately pointless opposition on principle. When you have 80 MPs voting against, 80 Conservative MPs voting against lockdown measures inside the Tory party, but they themselves know that Labour will support the government. Are we not? Could we be seeing all of these people actually saying, right, we're going to park this aside. We know what's going to happen. The orders are coming from another source, from the World Economic Forum, from the World Health Organization, from the Great Reset notion of Build Back Better, which we're seeing downloaded into countries' governments. Are we seeing the revenge of the professionals actually change allegiance from the EU as the locus of power to the World Economic Forum in Davos and Klaus Schwab and the Chinese social credit system? Are we seeing a change of general?
I don't even think we're seeing a change of general. There's two parts to this. First of all, in terms of British politics, we have an impotent opposition. The Labour Party is just not credible at the moment, I don't think. And I think that the Conservative MPs hoped that Labour Party would vote against this legislation. That's my impression. I've spoken to people like Steve Baker. They're very strong-minded and clear that they weren't doing this in the hope that Labour would save the government. It's too complicated. That sort of thing is just too complex to push through. So I actually think had Labour stood its ground, we would be in a very different path right now. Secondly, just in terms of the generals, now, your suspicion about professionals, I to some extent agree with, but I would actually nuance it. There are professionals I really respect. For example, there was a chap called Tony Frew, who's dead now, but he described this obsession about bad air killing people as a zombie statistic, because however many times you disprove it, it comes back to life to haunt us again. So there are professionals who are genuinely sincere. They support what's called the scientific method. You mentioned that before, but those people may not always be the most political. So they say it like it is, and it could be uncomfortable. I actually think Chris Whitty's in that category. I believe him. But then there's another group, and you see this in the environmental movement, and you also see this in the COVID environment, where they preach to us, hoping we don't have the information to make a judgment about it. With the environment, I would ask these environmentalists to explain why the Antarctic experienced its second coldest 6 months in recorded history this year, but nobody knows about it. With COVID, I will not want them to explain why is it that they can't accept that Omicron is actually like very bad flu. Why are we still being told that there's a tsunami, the favorite word, facing us now, where people are beginning to doubt that? We're getting 200,000 infections a day, but it's not going up as badly in the hospitals.
Responsible professionals. Dr. Peter McCulloch appeared on Joe Rogan the other day. That podcast now has about 40 million views, I believe. He is a research scientist. He's a medical doctor. He's been cancelled by the mainstream media, and then he's gone on to the alternative media and had a huge following, saying that none of the patients of COVID were treated with remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, any of the therapies, any of the treatments that we saw during the start of the lockdown being floated as alternatives to endless vaccine onboarding. Now, these are responsible professionals. A real scientist is a Socratic. He says, the only thing that I know is that I know nothing. Mm-hmm. And in that vein, I'll make a prediction about the future, and I'll give you the basis on which I make that prediction and all of the assumptions there that stand behind it, and then we'll see if I'm right. And if so, we'll do the process again. And so a scientist wants to be proven wrong by the next best theory. There's no trust the science. It's completely the opposite, and it's relying on this idea that there's a sequestered form of knowledge that the public shouldn't have access to. When we talk to the public, you and I often talk to the public, and as I've done it more, By the way, you must see that Peter McCulloch on Joe Rogan. We'll put the link in the description. He's done so well. It's really informative, and it tells you exactly what's going on. When we speak to the public, what I'm really astonished by is how people don't think the same things. You can't tell when you see somebody what they're going to say before they say it. And if you get jaded in that way, as you've told me many politicians are, then you've got no idea of democracy. Democracy is like looking and asking people to have a discussion. And when we say that actually the discussion is for the politicians, we miss out on any notion of getting the innovation, getting the ideas, getting the debate amongst the people at large. And instead of saying, no, government is a profession. It's not an activity for citizens. Do you think that? How do you think that? I mean, we have an idea about blockchain democracy and moving forward towards a form of direct democracy, as the new Athens seeks to revive the constitution. Ancient Athens, using your smartphone to let you vote. That's technology that's in the works. In now, though, how would you, as somebody who's been inside that honeycomb of the political profession and then outside of it in the world, in real democracy, real people talking and having debates, how would you see us able to get that democratic deficit down and start allowing for that debate to occur amongst the citizens?
The great question. Simple answer, hard to do. Give people the respect democracy expects them to get, and let them make the decision, even if you think it's going to be a dumb one. I lost my seat in 2010. People asked me, why didn't you call for a recount? Do you resent it? No, I lost. Whether I wanted to lose or not, and I obviously didn't, I lost. You just have to accept that's what the public decided on that day in Montgomeryshire, my old constituency. You move on. I don't feel in any bad terms with the guy who beat me, because democracy is competition. Unfortunately, what happens is people get elected mainly for the right reasons. Then they become corroded, they get stuck there, and they get institutionalized. So they begin to cut corners with their own value system to stay as MPs, which makes me think there's probably a shelf life for most people in politics. Where's the safety measure? Where do we get the direct democracy you're talking about? Yep, technology can help with that. But ultimately, I think that there is a tsunami, to use a word from the mainstream media about COVID, a tsunami which suddenly occurs when the public feels so shaken by what they're told. They say, no, and we're not doing that anymore. On the way here, I was looking at people on the tube, probably half of them were wearing masks. No one's going to be prosecuted because it's not credible. It's not credible to prosecute people for that reason of hypocrisy that we talked about before. So what actually happens is the public en masse goes, that's enough now. And it happens really fast. I experienced that to my cost. And I say that with humility. It was a valuable lesson, which I hope I'm able to deal with from now on, to apply in my own life. But the lesson is, when the public switch, they do it almost instantly. What we've got a problem with is, because we haven't got credible opposition, where do they go for voting? Lib Dems aren't going to be credible for a long time. Despite my suggestions, my efforts, my offer to help them, they just seem to be completely moribund. So it's Labour and Conservative at the moment, I'm sorry to say, but that's where we are. And with the Labour Party, there's no narrative. This is the problem, Lorenzo. There's no narrative. With Blair, you had a narrative, New Labour. You could understand what it was. It was cynical, but
opium wars, oil wars.
Pardon?
Yes, opium wars, oil wars.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a narrative.
I'm not saying it. I'm not making a moral judgment.
No.
But the fact is, if you want direct democracy, number one, the public will probably do a lot of it for you. Number two, you have to have somebody to vote for. I actually think there's a vacuum forming in this country for a party which just speaks to and with the people. And I think that Richard Tice is aware of that, Reform UK, very small party, very hard to start a new party, but it just could be that the the problems which have been created by the old parties could mean that we get a seismic shift. I'm not sure if that can happen.
Could we be seeing a coup against common law? So this idea that rights emerge from people and are given to governments, professionals, whomever, delegated authority. The idea that you're free to do as you wish unless you harm someone else, and then you have a suit, right, at law. This is a form of conflict management. Law is conflict management. What we're seeing now in Germany, in Greece, in France, throughout these lockdowns, is the nth degree of present your papers to even leave your house to get a loaf of bread. Now we're going to see in January a vaccine fines in Greece and Austria. Greece, Austria, and Germany, furthest apart after the Second World War. My family have Greek origins, and the Greeks don't like the Germans. They don't like to be like the Germans. But nevertheless, throughout this polity, suddenly we're seeing, oh, here's civil law. Here's the government giving you permission to do things. Here's this notion that you have to be given a law to be allowed to leave your house, to buy a loaf of bread, to associate with people. There's a bastion maybe in Britain, maybe that's why the lockdown's been less harsh, as you say, with fewer prosecutions, and maybe Texas, Florida, other places that have strong constitutional rights for personal liberties. Could we be seeing the sort of stamping out, attempt to stamp out this notion of personal rights?
Yeah, we've been seeing this
once and forever.
We've been seeing this for decades, actually. There's been a slow erosion of civil liberties, really since, well, I was going to say since World War II, but really probably since the end of the Cold War. I think post-World War II, there was a celebration of freedom for all kinds of historical reasons, though it was done in a slightly perverse way, which took people's freedoms away. The whole history of the Middle East shows that. But I think more fundamentally now, those who can see the opportunity to grab power, probably more than grabbing money, the two things go hand in hand, see the opportunity that crisis creates when the public trust someone to lead them. Churchill did it really well in World War II, singularly responsible really for the resistance of the UK against Nazism. Now our demons are COVID and climate change. And I come back to climate change because after COVID is resolved, as it must be, we'll be back to the climate emergency. We'll have 100 days to save the planet. Planet's doing just fine, by the way.
Obama has 2 seafront properties, one in Martha's Vineyard and one in Hawaii. Is a dynast like that, who's been inside the briefings, inside the West Wing, going to buy 2 massive beachfront properties at multi-million-dollar cost? No, the sea level is not going to rise. In his estimation, he's a dynast. He wants his name to last. He's not flipping the property that's going to be underwater in 10 years.
Let's think about Tuvalu. I don't know if you saw this dramatic press conference when the foreign minister stood up to his knees in a suit behind the podium in the water, saying that they were the front line. I did some research into Tuvalu between 1971 and 2014. I think those are the years. Tuvalu didn't get smaller. 73 out of the 100 or so islands there got bigger. It's gained something like, I think, 180 acres in that time. But you wouldn't think it when you watched all of this. And then, of course, we have to take the blame because we're the West and we've done all this wrong. If I ran Tuvalu, I'd probably do the same thing. If I can get a €500 million handout.
Carbon credits.
Fair enough. And you can't blame them for doing it, especially because we're handing it to people on a plate. So I actually think after the COVID scare, and it is a serious disease, 180,000 people dead in this country.
With
many of them dead from that, not all of them, of course, because of the way it's measured. It's a little bit vaguer than the figures suggest. So after that goes, we'll be back to the climate emergency. And that is where I think the biggest threat to our civil liberties come.
So to bring it back around, we have a zombified West. We have a rising China that doesn't need, that can both export its version of the social credit system using your smartphone to regulate you into the EU, into Hong Kong, as we've seen. These are into Australia and New Zealand. These are the test beds for command and control through tech. not the internet of people talking to one another across the world, this anarchic space of the free marketplace of ideas for the first time. But okay, in China, we're going to do the internet as top-down control. We're going to use it as a spider to control everything about your life into a social credit score. Now that's happening through Amazon, through Facebook, and through all of the social media platforms. We're seeing it built up. That's one bracketed way of seeing the future. Mark Zuckerberg with his metaverse and so on, ludicrous, and anti-human. How do we get the other message? You're right. There's no opposition, but this goes beyond the political parties. We're looking now to where's the pro-human narrative. Like I don't think we really see one right now, and it's very hard to get the message. We've been trying for a couple of years, and the technology will be key. The key is like, who is technology for? Is it for us or is it for our masters? And currently, apart from Bitcoin, blockchain, some cryptocurrency, we're not seeing any narrative where technology is enabling people to achieve things rather than constricting their choices.
So China, okay, in terms of technology, one of the problems with technology is once you let it out there, you can't control it quite so easily. You can have a centralized system where every keystroke is recorded. There are films about that sort of dystopian universe.
Minority Report, yes.
And there's another one. I think there's another one called The Circle. And so these correctly say all of that can be done. And you know it because if you're looking at holidays in Tenerife on your computer in the house, adverts for holidays in Tenerife will turn up on other people's computers in your house. So let's not pretend that we're not being watched, but much of that is electronic. Where does the resistance come from? From sitting in cellars like you and I are doing right now.
Here in the bunker.
In the bunker, but reaching out to the public saying, if you are comfortable with having your decisions taken away from you, let it carry on. But just be aware there's another option too. What does that option look like? And this is when it gets messy. We have to have people to vote for, assuming that we think democracy is a good way to do it.
Or parliamentary democracy or representative democracy.
I'm less concerned about how that democracy is implemented because actually they all converge to roughly the same thing anyway, in my opinion. But somebody with a different narrative, somebody who says, I actually remember that I'm elected to serve you, not elected to rule you. And this is the controversial point about China. China's not trying to rule the world. They're just trying to be in control of everything they need to do to make 1.7 billion people happy. And the waste product of that is having a huge reach, buying up vast resources in Africa, for example.
Sri Lanka, the whole
Sri Lanka.
Ports, yes, one belt, one road.
It's acquisitional. They're not evil. I used to be the deputy chair of the All-Party China Group when I was a member of Parliament.
Really?
And I had a lot of respect for a couple of things. Just give you one. I'll give you one example. When the UK had to give Hong Kong back to China, it was a deal. It wasn't a theft job. It wasn't a hit and run by China. It was part of the deal that the UK signed a long time ago. So when that expired and China had waited for that to happen, China got lambasted. But China made one promise, said, one country, two systems. That's what they said, one country, two systems, and they did it.
Until 2020, when they used it as a test bed for, okay, so we have the social credit system in China. Now let's do the first test bed of somebody outside, some sovereign entity outside China that doesn't have our dominance over the people of China. Hong Kong has had a different and more liberal common law system for 100 years. So yes, China said that, the Chinese Communist Party said that for some time, but then it became the first test for, oh, okay, so if we have these annoying people who go on strike and they have protests and so on, and they make a fuss, how do we crack down? And of course, we see abductions to the mainland, we see direct rule by Lam, and we see astonishing levels of oppression in Hong Kong.
Well, we didn't see China invading Iraq. We didn't see China attempting to invade and conquer Afghanistan. let they who are without blame cast the first stone here. China has got a huge vested interest. It's called China. And if we're so scared of China, if we want to damn them for, okay, second example, for their environmental track record, why have we exported our emissions to China? Anybody who buys a car from China has simply exported their emissions to that country.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, total utter hypocrisy.
Yeah,
and the other thing
is Foxconn. You know, if you look at middle class protesters in the West filming their protests on an iPhone, that's a slave phone. That's a slave phone. It's made in Foxconn. They commit suicide. They have nets to catch the suicides that commit suicide out of these factory islands. And then your Western middle class protester is filming their notion of oppression in a minor sense, exported with the phone manufacturer to the slave class in China. But then, there's a problem with some historical narrative, which I'm going to film with that tech.
My issue, therefore, is that we need to take a huge humility pill before we start preaching. And whether this ties into the question that you asked and about 2022, what can we do, is think for ourselves and give people the choice to own their destiny more than they have now. Most of the time, if you've got food, you've got some money, you've got some leisure, love, kids, foreign holiday, most of the people in the world would be fairly satisfied with that. It's Maslowian. There's a system, there's a theory called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I think has stood the test of 80 years since this guy Abraham Maslow put it together. And it more or less says, in a sentence, if the people are comfortable and not afraid, everything's going to be all right, more or less. But what's happening now is the changes are so intense, especially with the environment, where we're having uneconomic decisions which are hobbling the West. Let's not pretend that wind power and solar power has got a great mileage. I've got solar panels on my roof. I rue the day I bought them, basically. So I'm not like, I was a fairly early adopter. I'm not like sticking them out when it comes to technology. But as we hobble our economy by making uneconomic decisions about energy, for example, and you've seen the energy price go up. You know that in April there's going to be a nightmare in this country. So China capitalizes. Of course, they're going to make us the solar panels if we want them. Of course, they can make us wind turbines. I don't blame them for out-capitalizing the West. That's what they do. Where does this lead us? Well, in a sense, we can learn from the Chinese because they're smart and they're cute and they know what they're doing. Maybe we need to say, what is it that we want? Not the people just watching us now, but the wider public, and say, if you're happy with not being able to buy a petrol car after 2030, then do nothing. Do nothing.
To invert the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I think it was Oliver, our producer, told me that a revolution is equivalent to 40% of the median paycheck going on food. Like French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Cuban Revolution, Chinese Revolution, Nazis in Weimar. It's when the average wage is 40% spent on food, on sustenance. It's not starvation. It's not privation. It's that level of expense tipping over into for the most part of the society is getting a bad deal. Now, what we've seen with the lockdown is the food has been provided. What is the economy in this country? It's Deliveroo. It's heavy goods vehicles, it's logistics, it's provisions of food delivery, essentially. That's the main structure that was held in the lockdown, when all of the PR jobs and so on were taken offline, all of our knowledge economy didn't exist, and all of our future of innovation was put aside. All that we fundamentally have is a food provision. Okay, sewage, electricity, water, the basic level of Maslow's hierarchy, as you say, is provided for. And of course, that then means that there's no need for revolution, because people, as you say, are fundamentally okay. But all those other layers of actualization, self-actualization on the hierarchy can then be stripped away if you have those basic needs provided for, because then it's clear that you're not going to have that awakening of consciousness, because it's easy.
It is, yeah. The further down you get, we're getting into some very heavy stuff. I've done quite a lot of training on this in my former role as a global HR training manager. So I've studied this a lot. Basically, the unanswered need is the one you focus on. So if a tiger came in here now, we'd probably not be so worried about finishing the interview. We'd run for our lives. If there's no tiger, but we're starving, I'm probably saying that I can't come to the studio. I've got to find some food for my family. Above that, we've got love and belonging. Then it's self-esteem, and then there's self-actualization. What we're doing in the studio is self-actualization, and not everybody gets there. Back to the question you asked about 2022, what can we do differently? Maybe we could make people realize that their lives will become an existence if they have to pump themselves full of vaccinations if and when we don't actually need them. Huge, big debate. I don't want all these people accusing me of being an anti-vaxxer now and so on. But it's a big debate. At what point we actually begin to trust our internal systems, our biology, and 100,000 years of human evolution to deal with this? And then the second one, and I do keep coming back to this, at what point do we take a wake-up call and recognize that global warming doesn't mean global cooling? And to me, once again, and you've heard it first here on your podcast, my worry is after the COVID jamboree has left the parking lot, the stands that remain are the climate catastrophists who say things like, you have to change your life for the sake of your children and your children's children, because in 10 years' time, London will be flooded and it's your fault.
You're right. 100,000 years of human history has led us to live in cities where we have discussions and meetings with people. In reality, we have the online, the means of communicating outside of rooms, but in rooms, in spaces, we have the ability to talk and to understand one another and to come to a debate and to work out ideas. What we're seeing with this isolation of the lockdown is the splitting up of people, the inability of them to understand or interface with one another, and divide and rule is so much easier when everyone's in a basement. Okay, we are in a basement right now. However, if we're in a position where we don't have an interface in the city is where people come to seek opportunity, to seek interaction, to aid one another in innovation and in industry, and in all kinds of education on every level. And that's the form of self-actualization that we've come up with 100,000 years of human history, and the microbiome and the immune system that we have, so we can come across strangers, and we're not going to die of it. And now we're being told, oh, actually, that is the case. Separate, let the doctors take over. It's all fine. You don't need to make any decisions. There's no democracy for you. There's not going to be an election about this. That this is not a place for democracy. It's a place for officers.
That in itself isn't the key problem, because many of the people who are involved in this are genuinely trying to do the right thing. I think Matt Hancock was trying to do the right thing. He maybe blew it a little bit in a rather public faux pas, but
by putting all the sick people into care homes.
I was thinking of something else, but
well,
but the thing is that somebody like Matt, who once again I know he tried to do the right thing. The issue for me is we're getting to a stage where we're setting the precedent that government is there to tell us what to do rather than us telling government what we want from them. And it's the inversion that you described in a slightly different way. Instead of choosing our servants, we're following our rulers. And that is what I thought this country went to war more than once to try to prevent.
It's potentially a very good year. I'm very glad to have had Lembit inside the honeycomb of the establishment of all of these different power structures as somebody who can guide us and help us here at the New Athens with understanding some of these tensions and forces which are at play. And from there, with our blockchain think tank, moving towards, in 2022, a wider view of what a people's smart city, or what people's technology, or what people's debate, or what people's democracy can really be in the future. Now, you're a Democrat in terms of your training and in terms of your understanding of the public at large and that wisdom that's out there, that wisdom that sits within people and within debate. I'm really happy that we could have this debate now on New Year's Day and try and build that almanac, work out how to shepherd some of these notions of self-actualization into reality in the coming year. And I would just like to say to all of our audience, we'll be speaking more with Lembit. We'll have more guests on, having debates on news, current affairs, technology, health, self-actualization, and all of the things you can do to get out of this rut, to get out of this atomization of our society, which we're seeing increasingly, so that there's no decisions being taken democratically and among people debating with one another and having that free association. Free association is dying in this country, across Europe, across the West. Now, we have an opportunity with new media, which we can do from the bunker, as we understand, to have that debate and talk together. And that's what we're trying to curate here at the New Athens for the next year. Please join us on social media. We'll be posting the links. We're back after Wednesday with more shows and more debates on all these topics in a Socratic way, with a scientific method, wanting to be wrong. We want to be wrong. Let's work out what really makes sense. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Lembit, for coming along and giving us all that sage advice and insight as to what these power structures are really doing and where 2022 might take us. I'm Lorenzo Mefsett, founder of the New Athens. Join the blockchain think tank. It's here for us to develop technology for one another. Thank you. Happy New Year, and I'll see you next time.